Today's episode of Digging for Truth, we will have the guest Dr. Andrew Snelling, who's a geologist. Now, this is part two of a two-part episode on the Grand Canyon. Tell the audience about some of those details, and as a scientist, like how that all plays out.
Yeah, well, we need to just to refresh people's memories on the framing the research question. There's a plateau that the canyon has been carved through, and the flat-lying layers at the edge of the plateau have been bent, and they've been bent smoothly. And these are hard rocks today, and everyone knows that hard rocks will shatter when they break, like man-made concrete. Whereas the geologists claim that the first of these layers was deposited over 500 million years ago, and it was 450 million years later that the layers were bent with heat and pressure. Well, from a biblical perspective, we would argue no. The sandstone was deposited early in the flood, and then the layers were still wet when they were bent at the end of the flood, and they only dried out and so they bent smoothly without breaking, like wet concrete can be bent. And so the two issues are, the two scenarios, was it sediments laid down 450 million years later after cementation, was it bent? Or was it sedimentation, bending, then cementation? We have to look at details in the rock under a microscope, because if there was heat and pressure, the original texture and grains in the rock would have changed. And so that's why we had to go to meticulous lengths to have the thin sections cut and then spend hours looking down the microscope, photographing the evidence. And as you said, Henry, it's important to, first of all, to demonstrate to an unbelieving world that we as creation scientists are able to pose research questions and then answer them with meticulous, detailed research.
Take us on this journey together of some of the things that confirm your thesis and the fact that these rock layers were not formed over long periods of time.
Okay, I need to frame it carefully here, Henry, so that people understand. You've got, a huge bent rock layer of sandstone, sand turned to stone. And so we carefully collected samples from right in what we call the hinge zones. That's the hinge zone, that's the main bend area. We collected samples on the limbs away from the bend area, because there'd be less pressure on on that part of the rock layer. And we also collected samples from tens of miles away, because obviously we wanted to compare whether the samples from way, 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 had been under different temperature and pressure conditions or the same. That was very important, because we were right about the sediments being laid down and then bent while they were still soft and then cemented, then everything should be the same all the way through, from the hinge zone to the limb zones to the samples all the way away. And the answer is yes. That's exactly what we found. Whereas in the conventional view, if there was 450 million years between laying down of the rock layers and then the bending under heat and pressure, there should be differences between the hinge zone, the limbs, and the samples miles away. I saw under the microscope the original sediment grains. Most of the rock is made up of the mineral quartz, but we also found a mineral called feldspar, and also we found a soft mineral called mica. And so the very fact that the mica grains were still in the rock, and in fact they were bent around some of the quartz and feldspar grains, those minerals, particularly the mica, would have been affected by the heat and pressure, and also some of the clay minerals that were also in the rock should have been metamorphosed under heat and pressure, but they were still in their original sedimentary condition. And then between the grains was some quartz cement. That is what had happened. In the water, there was dissolved silica, window glass, that when the rock dried out, that silica had crystallized and joined all the grains together. And you could actually see the outlines of the original grains, and you could see the quartz cement that had been added on. And so the cement had not been damaged in any way at all. So it had to be sedimentation, the original sand grains preserved, no heat and pressure, bending of the rock, while it's still soft and wet, and then the cement, as the rock dried out, the cement formed, and it's still in its pristine condition. Totally different to what you would expect if it was deposited, hundreds of millions of years earlier, then bent. After being cemented, the cement would have shattered, it would have tried to regrow and heal. You'd see all those kinds of effects. You'd see the heat and pressure effects. I've got evidence presented from every sample so that people know that I'm not cherry picking. These results show that the hundreds of millions of years never happened, that the year-long flood, as presented in the Bible, was a literal historical event. And we see the record of that in the rock layers in the Grand Canyon. What we need to understand is that as Christians, by faith we understand the worlds were created by God. But it's not a blind faith. In Romans 1:20 we read that the evidence is clearly displayed in his handiwork that he created. We want to arm people with information so that it removes the skeptical arguments so they can point people to the Lord Jesus Christ and present the gospel. After all, that's the end result.
And the whole point of the whole Bible, the story of the whole Bible, is God redeeming his people, and that we can trust that part of the story and all of the story.